I am Eliza Matthews, 32 years old, a woman who has spent a decade building a proud career in finance, but in my father's eyes, I was never good enough. My family lived in an affluent suburb of Boston, where grand houses lined with orderly maple trees and meticulously maintained lawns painted a picture of perfection. From the outside, the Matthews family seemed like the ideal model: a successful father, an elegant mother, and 3 children raised in prosperity. But behind the heavy oak door of our family's mansion, everything was entirely different. It was a world filled with tension, where love was measured by achievements, and recognition was reserved only for those who met the exacting expectations of my father, Richard Matthews. My father was an ambitious man who transformed a small real estate company into a $1 million conglomerate. For him, success was not just a goal, but a religion, the sole measure of a person's worth. He believed that status, respect, and reputation were more valuable than family bonds. From a young age, I realized that my father was not the kind of man who would hug me when I fell off my bike or cheer for me at school performances. Instead, he was the one sitting at the dinner table holding my report card with a cold stare, asking why a B+ wasn't an A. He was the one standing on the sidelines of the soccer field, not to encourage me, but to point out that I wasn't fast enough, strong enough, or exceptional enough to be captain. Second place is just the first loser, he once said, his voice low, but sharp as a blade, cutting into my tender heart with each word. I grew up in the shadow of unattainable expectations in a family where outward perfection concealed deep cracks within. My older brother James, 3 years my senior, was the golden child, seemingly born to please my father. He played football, excelled in academics, dated girls from suitable families, those my parents could boast about at country club gatherings. James always knew how to make my father laugh, how to say the right things, how to navigate my father's world as if it were his own playground. When he graduated from the prestigious university my father had attended and later joined the family's real estate business, my father looked at him with a pride I had never received. To my father, James was the embodiment of everything he desired, an heir, a perfect reflection of himself. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Sophia, 2 years my junior, took a different approach. She wasn't the shining star like James, but she had a natural charm, an ability to read situations and diffuse tension. Sophia was the peacemaker in our family, the one who could make my father laugh when he was irritable, or quietly slip into my room after a night of his criticism to say, "It's not as bad as you think." She didn't compete with James for the spotlight, but she knew how to survive in my father's world without getting hurt too much. I always admired Sophia's finesse, but at the same time, I envied how effortlessly she navigated our family, while I always felt like an outsider. My mother, Caroline, was another piece of this complex puzzle. When my father wasn't around, she was warm and loving, always ready to hug me and share stories from her youth. But when he was present, she transformed into someone else. She became timid, her eyes constantly glancing at him as if seeking permission, before answering even the simplest questions. As a child, I couldn't understand this change, but as I grew older, I realized that my mother lived in fear of displeasing him. She never dared to stand up for me, James, or Sophia when my father's criticisms went too far. Instead, she chose to smooth things over, playing the role of the peacemaker, but her silence often left me feeling abandoned. I vividly remember one evening when I was 12 when my father held my math test, a proud A that any child would have been thrilled about. But he just looked at me, shook his head, and said, "If you had tried harder, this would have been an A+. Do you think this is enough to get into a good school?" I stood there fighting back tears while my mother sat beside him, staring at her plate, silent. Sophia, only 10 at the time, quietly squeezed my hand under the table, but that small comfort couldn't erase the burning sense of failure in my heart. Moments like these weren't rare. They repeated like a painful refrain, shaping my childhood and leaving me constantly wondering why was I never good enough. As I grew older, I tried my hardest to prove my worth. I graduated at the top of my high school class, earning a full scholarship to Cornell University, an achievement I thought would make my father proud. But instead of congratulations, he asked why I didn't choose his alma mater, as if my choice was a betrayal of the family legacy. Throughout college, I worked 2 part-time jobs, maintained high grades, and joined clubs to build my resume. But every time I came home for the holidays, my father would ask why I wasn't interning at more prestigious firms or why I didn't work for his company. Don't you want to work with the family, or do you think you're better than us? He once asked, his tone half mocking, half challenging. After graduation, I declined his perfunctory offer to work at his company. I knew that if I joined, I'd only be an employee hired out of nepotism, forever unable to escape his shadow. Instead, I moved to New York with 2 suitcases and a burning determination. I slept on a friend's couch, applied to jobs relentlessly, and finally landed an entry-level position at Goldman Sachs, one of the world's leading financial firms. When I called to share the news, my father simply said, let's see how long you last." Those words cut like a knife, but they also fueled me to throw myself into work, toiling day and night to prove he was wrong. 8 years later, I had climbed the ranks, becoming the youngest senior investment strategist in the company's history. I built my career from scratch without relying on family connections or my father's support. Each success was a brick I laid with my own hands, but deep down I still carried a persistent longing to be seen by my father, to hear him say he was proud of me. That's why I decided to buy the Mercedes S-Class, a lavish gift worth nearly a year's salary, to give to him for Father's Day. I naively thought such a grand gesture could change him, could make him look at me with the same pride he reserved for James. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just buying a car. I was trying to buy something every child deserves unconditionally: a father's love. The Matthews family, with all its outward glamour, was a system riddled with contradictions and unfairness. James was praised for achievements I had to work twice as hard to attain. Sophia, though not the center of attention, still received a kindness from my father that I never did. Dui jaila bandich sang tiang anqua juan van ban kung kap juok viet tunhien chin sakva gyun guyen tin tan qua ban gok jong thoi jambao ngon ngugan guiva fu hop voin ngukan. My mother, though she loved me, was trapped in the role of a submissive wife, never daring to challenge my father's authority. And I, the middle child, always felt like a misfit piece, as if I didn't belong in the family portrait my father had painted. Every achievement of mine, from the scholarship to Cornell, the job at Goldman Sachs to the apartment in Manhattan, was dismissed or brushed off by him as insignificant. "Finance is just a game of chance," he once said, when I shared news of my first promotion. "Real estate is true wealth, the kind that lasts through generations." Those words didn't just negate my efforts, they made me doubt my own worth. My father's lack of recognition wasn't just criticism or coldness. It was a systematic strategy, as if he deliberately pushed me away. I used to think that if I tried harder, did better, achieved more, he would change. But every time I came close to meeting his expectations, he raised the bar higher, leaving me feeling like I was running a race with no finish line. Meanwhile, James only needed to stroll casually to be celebrated, and Sophia was loved for her tactfulness. I didn't blame my siblings, they were just players in my father's game, but the unfairness left deep scars in my heart. As the annual family reunion approached, a familiar anxiety rose within me. It wasn't just an occasion for family togetherness. It was a stage for my father to flaunt his power and success. I prepared meticulously, choosing an expensive dress and delicate jewelry, hoping a perfect appearance would help me blend in. But in my purse, I carried a far greater secret: the DNA test results that would reveal why I always felt out of place in my family. I didn't yet know what I would do with it, but that truth was like a ticking time bomb, ready to shatter everything I thought I knew about the Matthews family. The idea for the Mercedes didn't come out of nowhere. It stemmed from an evening a few years ago when I overheard my father talking to a friend at the country club. He stood beside a sleek black Mercedes S-Class, owned by a business associate, and I saw his eyes light up, a rare spark of joy I seldom witnessed. He pointed at the car, commenting on its sophisticated design, powerful engine, and cutting-edge technology. One day he said, "I'll have one of these. It's a symbol of true success." Those words etched themselves into my mind, a rare clue to what might please him. I thought that if I gave him such a car, he would see me not just as a finance worker playing a game of chance, as he put it, but as a successful daughter worthy of his pride. Deciding to buy the car wasn't easy. It cost nearly a year's salary, even with the substantial bonus from my recent promotion. I spent weeks deliberating, visiting dealerships across New York, examining every model, every detail. I chose a black Mercedes S-Class with premium leather interiors, an advanced entertainment system, and every feature my father had mentioned. Standing before the car at the dealership, its glossy paint reflecting the showroom lights, I imagined him opening the door, sitting in the driver's seat, and smiling at me, a genuine smile, not the perfunctory nod he usually offered. I pictured him patting my shoulder as he did with James and saying, "Eliza, you've done well." It was the naive dream of a daughter craving her father's love, though my rational mind warned me it might never come true. I spent more time planning how to present the gift. The family reunion always took place the last weekend of June, right after Father's Day, so I decided to give him the car a day early to create a private moment between us. I contacted a dealership in Boston to arrange delivery, ensuring the car arrived at my parents' house on a Saturday afternoon when my mother was at her gardening club. I wanted this moment to be just me and my father, uninterrupted by guests or curious family eyes. I imagined he would be surprised, maybe even hug me, and for the first time I would feel the connection I had always longed for. But in my purse beside the car keys was something else, a sealed envelope containing the DNA test results that would change everything. That truth had come to me by chance, but it had shaken the very foundation of the world I thought I knew. 3 months before the reunion, I decided to try an online genetic testing service, mostly out of curiosity about my ancestry. I had heard friends talk about discovering interesting details like Irish roots or some distant lineage, and thought it would be a fun way to learn more about myself. I sent in a saliva sample, waited a few weeks, and opened the email results with a light-hearted mindset, never expecting they would upend my entire understanding of my family. The results showed that my genetic markers didn't match those of a father named Richard Matthews. At first I thought it was a mistake. How could it be I was Eliza Matthews, daughter of Richard and Caroline Matthews, raised in their home bearing their name? But a strange feeling crept over me, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. My father's coldness, his relentless criticism, his blatant favoritism toward James and Sophia, it all suddenly made sense. I wasn't his biological daughter. Shocked and bewildered, I decided to take a second test, this time more carefully. During a visit home, I discreetly took a few strands of hair from my father's brush and sent them along with my DNA sample for comparison. The second result confirmed my worst fear: Richard Matthews was not my biological father. The document, printed on 3 simple sheets of paper, tucked inside a white envelope, carried the weight of my entire life. It explained why I always felt out of place, why my father looked at me with distant eyes, why I could never please him no matter how hard I tried. I kept this secret to myself, sharing it only with my best friend Taylor. "You can't tell him about this," Taylor warned during a late-night call, her voice filled with concern. "It'll be like dropping a bomb on your family. Are you sure you want to do that?" I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to tear open the envelope, throw it away, and pretend nothing had happened. But another part, the part exhausted from living in self-doubt, wanted to confront the truth, to understand why my father treated me the way he did. That envelope became a secret weapon, a last resort I carried with me, unsure when or how I would use it. As the day to deliver the car approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. I spent hours preparing for the moment, not just physically, but mentally. I chose a navy blue dress from a designer my mother once said my father respected, paired with delicate gold jewelry and expensive but understated heels. I stood before the mirror in my Manhattan apartment, rehearsing the words I would say when handing over the keys. "Dad, I wanted to give you this for Father's Day. I hope you like it." I practiced to keep my voice steady, to hide the desperation swirling in my heart. I called the dealership in Boston to confirm that the car would be delivered on time, washed and polished to perfection. I imagined my father's eyes when he saw it, the sleek black Mercedes parked right in front of the house, reflecting the afternoon sunlight. I pictured him stepping outside, holding the keys, and for the first time looking at me as a true daughter. But deep down I knew how fragile that hope was. I had hoped so many times before, when I graduated top of my class, when I was hired at Goldman Sachs, when I bought my first apartment, and each time my father found a way to dim my joy. But this time I told myself it would be different. The car wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of every effort I had poured in, of the success I had achieved with my own hands. The night before leaving New York for Boston, I sat on my sofa holding the envelope containing the DNA test results. I opened it, rereading the dry clinical lines, confirming that Richard Matthews was not my biological father. I wondered if he had known this truth all along, if that was why he always kept me at a distance. I thought of my mother, of the time she looked at me with a tender yet sorrowful gaze as if guarding a secret she couldn't share. This envelope could be the key to unlocking everything, but it was also a bomb capable of destroying the family I had tried so hard to belong to. I tucked it into my purse right beside the car keys and told myself I would only use it if necessary, if my father pushed me into a corner again, if he made me feel worthless once more. On Saturday afternoon, I drove the Mercedes from the dealership to my parents' house in the Boston suburbs. My heart pounded as I parked it in front of the entrance, right in the middle of the gravel driveway leading to the mansion. The car looked flawless, like a work of art, and I felt a mix of pride and anxiety. I took a deep breath, checked my hair and outfit in the rearview mirror, and stepped out of the car, clutching a small gift box containing the keys, the Mercedes logo gleaming brightly. When I knocked on the door, my father opened it dressed in business casual attire, despite it being the weekend. He looked at me, his brow furrowing as if I had interrupted something important. "Eliza, you're early. The reunion is tomorrow," he said, glancing at his watch. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know, Dad. I wanted to give you your Father's Day gift early, just between the two of us." I handed him the gift box, my heart racing as he opened it. He looked at the keys, then at me, his eyes filled with suspicion. "What's this, some kind of joke?" he asked. I led him to the window, pointing to the Mercedes parked in the driveway. "That's my gift to you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I just got promoted and I wanted to do something special for you." He looked at the car, and for a fleeting moment I saw surprise on his face, a glimmer of what I hoped was joy. But then his expression reverted to its familiar analytical stare. He stepped outside, circled the car twice, inspecting every detail, as if appraising an asset. "Too extravagant, Eliza," he said, his voice cold. "What are you trying to prove?" His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had prepared myself for many scenarios, but not this indifference. I forced a smile, saying, "I just wanted to make him happy," but he continued with questions that felt like an interrogation. "How did you pay for this? What about insurance? What's the loan interest rate?" I answered each one, trying to stay calm, but every word from him was like a cut, shattering the hope I had built. After a short test drive, he remarked that the steering felt a bit loose despite the car being praised for its world-class handling. He parked it in the garage rather than leaving it in the driveway as I had hoped, and offered a curt thank you, followed by a comment that I must be making quite a bit to waste money like this. I left my parents' house and drove back to the hotel, overwhelmed by a sense of defeat. I called Taylor, recounting everything, my voice choked with emotion. "Forget him, Eliza," she said, her tone filled with anger on my behalf. "You should take the car back. He doesn't deserve it." I brushed off the idea, still clinging to the hope that tomorrow, at the reunion, he would be different. But in my purse, the DNA test envelope remained a reminder that the truth might be bigger than the gift I had just given. That night, alone in my hotel room, I sat staring out at Boston's city lights. The DNA test envelope lay on the table, almost like a living thing challenging me to face it. I thought about the years I had lived, about the times my father looked at me as if I didn't belong in the family. I recalled small moments like when he hugged James after a football game, or laughed with Sophia when she told a funny story. Those moments were never for me. Had he known the truth all along? Had he seen me, even as a child, as a reminder of something he wanted to forget? I thought about my mother, about how she always looked at me with tenderness, mixed with sadness. Did she know? Had she kept this secret, just as she stayed silent in the face of my father's criticisms? I had once asked her carefully about the years before she married my father, but she always changed the subject, as if afraid I would dig too deep. The test results weren't just a fact about genetics. They were the key to understanding why my family functioned the way it did, why I always felt like a mismatched puzzle piece. I couldn't sleep that night. I thought about the Mercedes, the money I had spent, the hope I had invested in it. I thought about the envelope, about the power it held, and the destruction it could unleash. I wondered if I had the courage to use it to confront my father, my mother, the entire family. But above all, I wondered if this truth could set me free, or if it would only cost me what little remained of the family I had tried so hard to belong to. As dawn broke, I prepared for the family reunion, carrying both hope and fear. The car, the gift I had poured my heart into, now felt like a symbol of my naivety. The DNA test envelope tucked quietly in my purse was a reminder that I stood at a crossroads. I didn't know what would happen at the reunion, but I knew everything was about to change, not just for my family, but for me. I took a deep breath, looked at myself in the mirror, and stepped out of the hotel room, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I stood before the mirror in my hotel room, the dim glow of Boston's city lights filtering through the window, casting shadows on the navy blue dress I had carefully chosen for the Matthews family reunion today. In my purse, the Mercedes key gleamed beside the envelope containing the DNA test results, two small objects that carried the weight of my entire life. Yesterday, when I handed the car to my father, I had clung to a fragile hope that he would see me differently, that he would recognize me as more than the disappointing daughter he always perceived. But his indifference, his critical remarks, and the way he parked the car in the garage as if it weren't worth showing off had extinguished that spark of hope. Now, as I prepared to step into the reunion, I felt a familiar tension rising, mingled with something new, a quiet determination, as if I stood at a crossroads with no way back. On this Sunday morning in June, Boston's weather was gentle with golden sunlight and a soft breeze, as if nature were deliberately painting a perfect picture to mask the storm about to unfold. I drove to my parents' house, the familiar gravel driveway leading to the Matthews mansion coming into view, lined with orderly maple trees, and the luxury cars of guests already filling the entrance. I parked, checked my hair and makeup in the rearview mirror, and tried to conceal the anxiety swirling within me. The dress I wore today, an elegant, understated design that exuded professionalism, was my final effort to fit into my father's world, where everything from appearance to behavior had to be flawless. In my purse, the DNA test envelope lay quietly, a reminder that I carried a secret capable of shattering the family portrait my father had so carefully crafted. I didn't know if I would use it. Part of me wanted to keep it hidden, to continue pretending nothing was wrong as I had done for 32 years. But another part, the part exhausted by criticism, by the feeling of not belonging, urged me to face the truth. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the heavy oak door of the mansion, preparing to step onto the stage of the Matthews family. When I pushed the door open, my mother was the first to greet me. She hugged me, her smile warm, but her eyes betraying a flicker of worry, as if she sensed something amiss. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, then quickly added, "Your father's in the backyard with the Petersons." Her words, as always, carried a subtle warning, as if preparing me for what lay ahead. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I knew this reunion would be unlike any before. Inside the house, the atmosphere was lively, yet laced with a familiar pretense. The grand hall, adorned with ancestral portraits and expensive antique furniture, was filled with guests, relatives, friends, and business associates my father always invited to bolster his status. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, approached with air kisses and a barrage of questions about my love life. Uncle George, with an enthusiastic handshake, called me the Wall Street Wizard, a nickname I knew would irk my father if he heard it. Cousins, family, friends, and familiar faces drifted by, engaging in the same annual conversations like a play rehearsed and performed with pre-assigned roles. I found a quiet corner, observing everyone with a strange sense of detachment. The DNA test had shifted my perspective, making me view my family like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. My brother James arrived late as usual, with his wife Rebecca and their two perfect children receiving a warm embrace from my father, a gesture I had never experienced. Sophia, my younger sister, quietly came to my side, pulling me into a warm hug. "I heard about your promotion, Liz." "That's amazing," she whispered, using the childhood nickname only she still called me. Sophia's sincerity was a soothing balm, but it also highlighted the stark contrast with my father's coldness. I noticed the Mercedes I had given my father was now parked prominently at the entrance where every guest could see it. This sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps he had reconsidered. Perhaps he would acknowledge my gift in front of everyone. But when I looked out the window and saw him leading a group of business associates to admire the car, pointing and boasting as if he had bought it himself, my heart sank. Not once did he mention me, not a word of thanks, not a single sign that the gift was from me. Sophia appeared beside me, handing me a glass of wine. "He's been showing off the car all morning," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "Mom told me you gave it to him. That was so generous, Liz." I took a sip of wine, trying to hide my disappointment. "It's not about generosity," I admitted. "I just wanted him to see me even just once." As everyone moved to the main dining room for dinner, the atmosphere grew heavier. I sat on a chair near the window, slightly removed from the main circle of conversation, observing the family with newfound clarity. My father entered from the backyard, accompanied by 3 business associates, laughing loudly at a story that was likely only mildly amusing, but amplified by the teller's status. His eyes swept the room, nodding to guests, but when they landed on me, they paused for just a second, accompanied by a subtle purse of his lips before he turned away, whispering something to my mother. There was no special greeting for me, the daughter, who had just given him a car worth a fortune. My mother approached, lightly touching my arm. "Sweetheart, your father mentioned the car you gave him. It's wonderful," she said, her eyes a mix of gratitude and worry. "Come say hello to the Stevensons. They're back from a finance conference in Singapore and want to hear your thoughts." That was my mother's way, always trying to smooth things over, creating reasons for me to fit in, as if family affection needed to be orchestrated like a business meeting. I nodded and followed her, but inside the familiar sting of hurt simmered. Dinner began formally, with the large mahogany table arranged to perfection, from the sparkling crystal glasses under the chandelier to the precisely placed fresh flower arrangements. I found my name card at the far end of the table, seated between a cousin I'd only met a few times and one of my father's younger business associates, a placement designed to keep me far from the center of attention. James and his family sat near my father at the head of the table, while Sophia and her husband played a mediating role between the core family and less prominent guests. My mother sat at the opposite end, a symbol of her role, close yet distant, loving, but bound by the invisible barriers my father created. My father stood, raising his glass of wine, signaling for everyone to quiet down. He began his annual speech, his voice rising and falling with the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to commanding a crowd. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion," he said, his smile polished over years of performance. "Each year I'm reminded how grateful I am to have built not just a successful business, but a legacy embodied by my family." He looked toward James, nodding with approval, then to Sophia, offering a warm smile. When his gaze passed over me, it was as if I were part of the wall, invisible and inconsequential. He went on to praise James for his latest real estate project, Sophia, for her charitable work, and concluded with a remark that the family's success came from pursuing proven paths rather than needlessly challenging tradition. His eyes lingered on me, laden with implication, like a warning. The atmosphere grew stifling as the meal progressed. My father steered the conversation, ensuring it revolved around his preferred topics: real estate, local politics, and stories of James's old athletic triumphs. When my mother tried to mention my promotion, he swiftly interrupted, shifting the topic to the financial markets, with a question directed at a business associate. Every time my name came up, he found a way to diminish me. "Eliza, your firm mainly handles domestic investments, right? That's limiting when global opportunities are expanding," he said, his tone patronizing, as if lecturing. I responded, keeping my voice calm, explaining that my risk assessment model had been adopted by the international division, but he waved it off as if it were insignificant. By the fish course, I felt a mounting pressure in my chest. My father continued to lob pointed questions, each designed to make me feel small. "I heard your promotion was tied to the Davidson account. Lucky you, since James introduced you to William Davidson at last year's charity gala," he said. I corrected him, my voice still gentle but firm. "Actually, it was an open bidding process, no introductions involved." But he only smirked, turning to a business associate to discuss real estate as if my words weren't worth hearing. The tension reached its peak as dessert was served. Mrs. Peterson, a guest, asked me with good intentions, "Eliza Richard says you're still single. A beautiful, accomplished woman like you must be intimidating the men in New York." Before I could respond, my father cut in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Eliza's always busy proving something instead of building something. Some people chase titles and salaries to fill other voids. Family requires compromise, something the women of the Matthews family usually understand better than she does." His words were like a dagger, sharp and precise, crafted to humiliate me in front of the family and guests. My mother inhaled sharply, clutching her napkin, but said nothing. Sophia looked at me, her eyes filled with worry, while James smirked as if pleased by my downfall. The dining room fell silent, all eyes turning to me, a mix of pity and curiosity. I felt the blood rush to my face, then drain away, leaving a cold sensation. In that moment, every year of criticism, dismissal, and marginalization flashed through my mind. I thought of the Mercedes, the money I had spent, the naive hope that it would change everything. I thought of the envelope in my purse, the truth it held. And then, as if a final thread snapped, I realized I could no longer live begging for love from a man who was never going to give it. I stood, my movements slow but deliberate, drawing the room's attention. I didn't raise my glass, a purposeful refusal to play along in my father's performance. "Thank you, Dad, for the inspiring speech," I said, my voice clear, using the professional tone I reserved for high-stakes meetings. "I've spent 32 years trying to earn your recognition, chasing standards that shifted every time I got close. Today, I finally understand why." The room went deathly quiet, my mother's eyes wide with panic, while my father narrowed his, sensing I was breaking his carefully scripted narrative. I continued, my voice soft but sharp. "Everyone here knows I graduated top of my class at Cornell, built a career without relying on family, and just became the youngest senior investment strategist in my company's history. Not exactly a loser, right?" I glanced around the table, catching the subtle nods of a few relatives before turning back to my father. "But in your world, success isn't about achievement. It's about following your vision, reflecting your glory, instead of creating my own light." I reached into my purse, pulling out the DNA test envelope, feeling its weight in my hand. "I bought you a car worth a year's salary, not because you needed it, but because I still hoped one day you'd see me. But I was wrong. The problem isn't me, it's my DNA." I placed the envelope on the table, my movements deliberate, ensuring everyone saw it. "Happy Father's Day," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm, then turned and walked away. The room was silent, broken only by my mother's gasping breath and the sound of chairs shifting as a few guests stirred. I walked through the grand hall, my back straight, my steps unhurried, holding on to the dignity my father had tried to strip away. As I reached the door, I heard the eruption of voices behind me, questions piling into a chaotic murmur. I didn't look back. I stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, soothing the fire in my chest. The Mercedes still sat at the entrance, gleaming under the house's lights. It was no longer a gift, but a symbol of my naivety, of the years I had wasted chasing something that was never real. I pulled the spare key from my purse and pressed the unlock button, the soft beep sounding almost out of place in this moment. I slid into the driver's seat, the scent of new leather and a hint of my father's cologne, lingering, a reminder of his brief presence in the car. Through the windshield, I saw silhouettes at the dining room window, animated gestures, signaling the family's descent into chaos. I started the engine, its smooth rumble filling the air, and as I pulled out of the driveway, I saw my father appear at the front door, holding the torn-open envelope, shouting something I couldn't hear. The image of him, usually so composed and in control, now distorted with anger, was a moment I would never forget. I pressed the accelerator, leaving the Matthews house behind, a surge of freedom rising in my chest, as if I had just escaped an invisible prison that had held me captive for 32 years. As I drove the Mercedes S-Class away from the Matthews mansion, the house's lights shone through the windshield, casting faint streaks of light across my face. The smooth hum of the engine couldn't drown out the chaotic sounds echoing in my mind. My father's shouts from the front door, the stunned whispers of the guests in the dining room, and the pounding of my heart as if it might burst through my chest. I had just placed the DNA test envelope on the table, publicly revealing that Richard Matthews was not my biological father in front of my family and strangers alike. That act, though it lasted mere seconds, shattered the wall I had built around myself for 32 years, the wall of longing for recognition, of hoping that one day my father would love me. As I pressed the accelerator, leaving the gravel driveway and the lavish house behind, I felt a strange sense of freedom tinged with fear of what would come next. As I drove back to the hotel in downtown Boston, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Messages and calls from my younger sister Sophia came first, filled with worried questions. Liz, are you okay? What just happened? Dad's going crazy. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was angry with Sophia, but because I needed time to breathe to process what had just occurred. I silenced the phone, letting it vibrate quietly on the passenger seat, and focused on the road ahead. The city lights flashed by like fragments of a world I once thought I belonged to, but now I wasn't so sure. When I reached my hotel room, I sank onto the sofa, kicking off my high heels, my navy blue dress crumpled after a long day. I opened my phone, finding dozens of messages and missed calls, not just from Sophia, but from my mother, and a lengthy message from my older brother James, his tone cold and threatening. Eliza, your actions tonight were unacceptable. You think you can slander the family and take back the gift you gave Dad? We'll talk through lawyers. Don't make this worse. I read the message, anger flaring within me, but it quickly gave way to a profound exhaustion. James, as always, stood by our father, defending the Matthews legacy as if it were his personal mission. Sophia called again, and this time I answered. Her voice trembled as if she were holding back tears. Liz, where are you? Dad tore open the envelope right after you left. He read it, then started yelling, saying you're trying to destroy the family. Mom locked herself in her bedroom, and James keeps talking about suing you over the car. Liz, is it true Dad's not your real dad? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Yes, Soph, I said, my voice hoarse. The DNA test doesn't lie. I'm not his biological daughter, and maybe that's why he never loved me. Sophia was silent for a moment, then spoke with the sincerity only she could muster. Liz, I don't care about the DNA. You're my sister, always will be. I'm just worried about you. Are you okay? Her words, simple but warm, were like a lifeline in the storm. I reassured her that I was fine, though I wasn't sure if I truly was, and promised to call her again in the morning. After hanging up, I stared out the window, the city lights blurring as tears began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of release, a feeling that I had done the right thing, no matter how painful. The next morning, I received a message from my mother, brief but heavy with emotion. Eliza, I need to see you. Please. Bluebell Cafe, 10 a.m. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face her after what had happened, but a part of me wanted to know the truth, not just about the DNA test, but about the years my mother had stayed silent, letting me endure my father's coldness. I agreed, dressing simply in jeans and a sweater, a deliberate rejection of the polished facade the Matthews family always demanded. Bluebell Cafe sat in a quiet corner of Boston with red brick walls and small wooden tables that offered a cozy contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the Matthews mansion. My mother was already there when I arrived, a cup of tea in front of her, her eyes tired but gentle. She stood and hugged me, her embrace tighter than usual, as if she feared I might vanish. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to say after last night. You were so brave, and I wasn't brave enough to protect you. We sat down and she began to speak, her voice slow, as if each word was being pulled from a painful past. She told me that before marrying my father, she had loved a man named Thomas Keller, a talented engineer, but not from a social class her family approved of. When she discovered she was pregnant with me, Thomas had left unaware of my existence because her family forced her to cut contact. My father, Richard Matthews, then a family friend, offered to marry her to protect her honor, even though he knew I wasn't his. He promised to love you as his own, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I saw him change. He couldn't accept you, and I was too weak to stand up for you. Her confession was both liberating and painful. It confirmed what I had suspected, but also ignited anger not just toward my father, but toward her, for letting me grow up doubting myself. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice catching. "Why did you let me think I wasn't good enough, that I was the problem?" She bowed her head, unable to meet my eyes. "I was afraid of losing the family, of losing everything. I thought if I stayed silent, things would be okay. But I was wrong, Eliza. I'm so sorry." Our conversation stretched for hours, punctuated by heavy silences and tears. My mother handed me a small piece of paper with Thomas Keller's email address and phone number, which she had found through a mutual friend. "He deserves to know about you," she said, her voice filled with hope. "And you deserve to know him." I took the paper, feeling as if it were a key, though I didn't yet know which door it would unlock. A few days later, back in my New York apartment, I sat staring at the piece of paper my mother had given me. The name Thomas Keller carried a strange weight, as if it were a part of me I had never known. I looked him up online, discovering he was a mechanical engineer living in Philadelphia, working for a medical device manufacturing company. His LinkedIn profile showed a man in his early 60s with a kind smile and eyes that bore a striking resemblance to mine, a similarity I couldn't ignore. I drafted an email to him, but each time I finished, I deleted it, terrified that he might reject me, or worse, not care. Finally, after 3 days of hesitation, I sent a brief email introducing myself as Eliza Matthews, saying I might be his daughter, and proposing a meeting. I hit send, my heart pounding, feeling as if I had just leapt off a cliff, without knowing where I would land. Thomas replied within hours, his tone polite but surprised. "Eliza, I was astonished to receive your email. I had no idea about your existence, but I'd like to meet you to understand more. Are you free this weekend? I can come to New York." His response brought a mix of relief and anxiety. I agreed to meet him at a small restaurant in Greenwich Village, a neutral, informal place where I hoped we could both feel at ease. On the day of my meeting with Thomas, I arrived early, choosing a corner table in the restaurant where soft light streamed through the window. I wore a simple white blouse and tailored trousers, understated yet confident, reflecting the self-assurance I had built in my career. But as I sat there sipping water, I felt like a little girl again, waiting for something that could change my life. Thomas walked in, tall, with salt and pepper hair and a shy smile. When he saw me, his gaze lingered, as if searching for something familiar. "Eliza," he asked, his voice warm but cautious. I nodded, standing to shake his hand, but he surprised me with a gentle hug. "I don't know where to start," he said, sitting across from me, "but I'm so glad to meet you." Our conversation began awkwardly, but grew more natural with time. Thomas shared that he had loved my mother when they were young, but her family disapproved of him because he wasn't from their elite social circle. When she cut contact, he thought it was her choice, unaware she was pregnant. "If I had known about you, Eliza, I wouldn't have let you grow up without me," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I told him about my life, my career, the Matthews family, and finally that night at the reunion. He listened without interrupting, his eyes filled with empathy. When I mentioned the DNA test, he nodded, offering to take another test if I wanted further confirmation. But looking at him, the way he smiled, the way he tilted his head when listening, so much like me when I'm focused, I knew he was my father. Our meeting stretched until the restaurant was nearly closing, and as we parted, he took my hand and said, "Eliza, I don't know if I can make up for the years we've lost, but I'd like to try, if you're willing." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the feeling of being found. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and I stayed in touch through emails and phone calls. He sent me photos from his younger days, shared stories about the engineering projects he was passionate about, and asked about my life in New York. We met a few more times, each encounter easier than the last, as if we were building a bridge between the past and the present. Thomas didn't try to replace the role of a father, but he offered a presence I had never known, someone who listened, respected me, and didn't demand I prove my worth. Meanwhile, the Matthews family remained in turmoil. James sent another letter through a lawyer demanding I return the car, calling my actions theft and slander. I returned the car not out of fear, but because I wanted no ties binding me to Richard. My father never contacted me directly, but my mother said he was obsessed with the DNA test, refusing to acknowledge it publicly, but unable to deny it privately. My mother and I began talking more regularly, and she slowly opened up, sharing stories from her youth she had never told before. Sophia became my greatest ally during this time. She flew to New York one weekend, sitting with me in my apartment as we talked about everything from the truth about Thomas to the wounds the Matthews family had left. "You don't need him, Liz," she said, holding my hand. "You're enough for me, for Mom, for anyone who sees your worth." Her words, along with Thomas's presence and my mother's newfound sincerity, helped me begin to heal the scars I had carried for years. As I drove back to New York after meeting my mother at Bluebell Cafe, the Boston sunset faded behind the horizon, leaving me with a mix of relief and emptiness. The DNA test envelope, which had shaken the Matthews family to its core, was now just a piece of paper in my purse, but its weight still pressed on my shoulders. I had just confronted the truth that Richard Matthews, the man I called my father for 32 years, was not my biological father, and that my mother Caroline had kept this secret to protect a family I had never truly belonged to. The meeting with my mother had opened a new door, not just to Thomas Keller, my biological father, but to myself. Yet that door also led to questions I wasn't ready to answer. Who was I if not Richard Matthews's daughter? And what would I do with this truth to keep living? Back in my Manhattan apartment, I sat on the sofa, the city lights twinkling through the window. But this time, they didn't evoke the loneliness they once had. The meeting with Thomas Keller, though just a beginning, had planted a seed of hope in me. Yet I knew that to truly move forward, I needed to confront the wounds the Matthews family had left, not just from Richard's rejection, but from the self-doubt I had carried for years. I decided to seek a therapist, a step I had delayed for too long, thinking I could overcome everything on my own. But after that fateful night at the reunion, I realized I could no longer run from myself. I found Dr. Hannah Lerner, a therapist on the Upper West Side, through a recommendation from my best friend Taylor. At our first session, I stepped into her office with a touch of skepticism, feeling as if I were admitting defeat. The small room with its pale blue walls and comfortable armchair offered an unexpected sense of safety. Hannah, a woman in her 50s with a gentle smile and sharp eyes, invited me to sit and asked a simple question: "Eliza, what brings you here today?" I began to speak, hesitant at first, about the reunion, the Mercedes, the DNA test envelope, and the years I had spent trying to please a father who never loved me. Hannah listened without interrupting, nodding gently and taking notes. When I finished, she asked, "How did it feel to say all of this?" I fell silent, realizing I didn't know the answer. I had spent my life suppressing emotions, projecting strength, proving I could handle anything. But now, in this quiet room, I felt like a child, vulnerable and yearning to be heard. In the sessions that followed, Hannah helped me unearth the emotions I had buried. She asked about moments when I felt inadequate, times I compared myself to James, and how I blamed myself for failing to please my father. In one session, she asked me to write a letter to my 12-year-old self, the girl clutching an A-test paper standing before her father, hoping for recognition. I wrote, tears falling onto the page, apologizing to that girl for letting her feel unworthy. "That girl did nothing wrong," Hannah said softly. "And neither did you, Eliza. The adults in your life failed to give you unconditional love. Now you can give that to yourself." Therapy wasn't a miracle cure. Some days I left Hannah's office feeling drained, as if I had run an emotional marathon. But gradually I began to realize that my worth didn't lie in my achievements or the recognition of others. I learned to let go of the need for Richard's approval, not by denying him, but by accepting that he had no right to define me. Each therapy session was a small step, but they led me to a place I never thought I could reach, a place where I loved myself, not for what I had accomplished, but for who I was. While I worked with Hannah to heal my inner wounds, I also began rebuilding my relationship with my mother. After our meeting at Bluebell Cafe, she started calling and texting more frequently, no longer engaging in the brief, polite conversations of the past. She sent small messages asking what I had eaten or sharing a memory from her youth, things she had never done before. I realized that the truth about Thomas Keller had freed her from a secret she had carried for 3 decades, and she was trying to reconnect with me not just as a mother, but as a woman seeking to right her wrongs. One afternoon, my mother flew to New York to visit me. I invited her to my apartment, a space I had decorated myself with abstract paintings and shelves full of finance books and novels. When she walked in, she looked around smiling. "You've created a beautiful home, Eliza," she said, her voice filled with pride. It was the first time I felt she saw me as an adult, not as a daughter needing guidance. We sat on the sofa sipping tea, and for the first time we talked like friends. My mother shared stories about the years before she married my father, about how she loved Thomas Keller, but was pressured by her family to choose a suitable marriage. She admitted she was terrified when she found out she was pregnant with me, fearing that without marrying Richard, she would be ostracized by society. "I chose safety," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But I was wrong to let you pay the price for that choice." I took her hand, telling her I didn't blame her, not because I had fully forgiven her, but because I understood she was also a victim of pressures I couldn't imagine. From then on, our relationship grew more genuine. My mother began sharing stories about her youth, about her dream of becoming a journalist, that she gave up to be Richard Matthews' wife. I told her about my work, the projects I was tackling, and my therapy sessions with Hannah. Once she broke down in tears when I said I was learning to love myself. "I've always loved you, Eliza," she said. "I just didn't know how to show it." Those moments, though small, helped us build a new bridge, no longer overshadowed by Richard's presence. Sophia, my younger sister, became an indispensable part of my healing journey. After the reunion, she flew to New York more often sometimes, just to have dinner or take a walk in the park with me. Sophia had always been the family's peacemaker, but now she became my closest confidant, the only Matthews family member who truly understood what I had been through. During a walk in Central Park, she held my hand and said, "Liz, I always knew Dad wasn't fair to you, but I never thought it was because of the DNA thing. I just want you to know you're my sister no matter what happens." Sophia also opened up about the pressures she faced in the family, the pressure to please our father, to keep the peace, to avoid disrupting everything. "I wasn't as brave as you," she admitted. "I always chose to avoid conflict. But when you stood up at the reunion, I felt like you did what the whole family needed. You broke through that pretense." Her words made me realize that my actions weren't just for myself, but a way to free others in the family from Richard's cycle of control. We started having sisterly weekend nights, eating pizza, watching comedies, and talking about everything from childhood memories to future dreams. Sophia told me about her charity work, her desire to start an organization to support children from struggling families. I shared details about my finance projects, the pride I felt when my risk assessment model was embraced by international clients. Those moments, simple but authentic, taught me that family doesn't have to be defined by blood, but by those willing to stand by you no matter what. While my relationships with my mother and Sophia began to mend, Richard kept his distance. After the reunion, he sent another letter through his lawyer, demanding a public apology for slander and the return of the Mercedes. I agreed to return the car, not out of fear, but because I wanted nothing tying me to him. The car, once a symbol of naive hope, was now just a reminder of the years I had wasted chasing his love. I mailed the keys back with a short note. "This car didn't change anything. I don't need it to prove my worth." Richard never responded directly. My mother said he became more withdrawn, spending most of his time at the office, avoiding any mention of me or the DNA test. Once when I called her, I heard his voice in the background asking, "Who's that?" When she said it was me, he replied, "Tell her not to bother us anymore." Those words, though not directed at me, still cut, but they no longer hurt as they once would have. Through therapy, I had learned to accept that Richard's rejection was his issue, not mine. He had chosen not to love me, and I no longer needed to carry that burden. While I severed ties with Richard, my relationship with Thomas Keller, my biological father, began to blossom. After our first meeting in Greenwich Village, we stayed in touch initially through emails and phone calls, then through more frequent meetings. Thomas lived in Philadelphia, but was willing to drive or fly to New York once a month to see me. Each meeting allowed us to discover more about each other, like two friends reconnecting with a lost part of themselves. Thomas had a gentleness I had never seen in Richard. He listened to me not just with curiosity, but with genuine respect. He asked about my work, my hobbies, the books I was reading. When I told him about my career, he smiled and said, "You have an engineer's mind, Eliza. You see patterns and solve them. I'm proud of you." Those words, simple yet sincere, were what I had craved my whole life from Richard, but now they came from a man I had only just met. We also talked about the lost years. Thomas told me about his life, a single man with no children who had spent his life building a career and living a quiet but lonely existence. He admitted he had never forgotten my mother but respected her choice and didn't try to reconnect. "If I had known about you, Eliza," he said during one dinner, "I would have done everything to be there for you." I believed him not just because of his words, but because of the way he looked at me, as if I were a miracle he hadn't dared to dream of. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments when we didn't know what to say, or when I felt guilty for bringing this truth into his life so abruptly. But Thomas was patient, never pressuring me to call him Dad or to play the role of a perfect father. Instead, he let me define our relationship, and that gave me a sense of freedom I had never known in the Matthews family. 6 months after the Matthews family reunion, I began to feel a profound change within myself. Therapy with Hannah helped me learn to forgive not just my mother, but myself for ever thinking I wasn't good enough. My relationships with my mother and Sophia became a source of strength, a reminder that family is those who choose to stand by you. And Thomas, with his gentle presence, offered hope that I could build a new relationship unbound by the wounds of the past. One evening, standing in my apartment gazing at Manhattan's skyline, I realized I was no longer the little girl craving Richard's approval. I was Eliza Matthews, a woman who had built a career, overcome pain, and found her worth within herself. I didn't need Richard to validate that, and I no longer needed to prove anything. My family now was my mother, Sophia Thomas, and friends like Taylor, people who loved me, not for who I was in their eyes, but for who I was. 6 months after the Matthews family reunion, I stood in my Manhattan apartment, looking out at New York's skyline shimmering under the nightlights. This apartment, with its abstract paintings on the walls and shelves filled with my favorite novels, had become my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself without needing to prove anything. Through therapy with Dr. Hannah Lerner, heartfelt conversations with my mother and Sophia, and new moments with Thomas Keller, my biological father, I learned that family isn't just those tied by blood, but those who love and respect you unconditionally. I let go of the need for Richard Matthews' approval, no longer allowing his rejection to define my worth. But more than that, I realized my journey wasn't just about healing, it was about inspiring others who might be struggling to find their own strength. My story, from a girl yearning for her father's love to a confident woman who stood up to manipulation and walked away from toxic relationships, is a reminder that we have the power to define our own family and worth. I wanted to share this story not just to recount what happened, but to tell anyone feeling lost that they are not alone, that they can reclaim their strength and live true to themselves. This is the story of how I found my true family and learned to love myself, and I hope it gives courage to those who need it. As I began my healing journey, one of the greatest lessons I learned was that family isn't defined by blood or birth certificates. For 32 years, I lived with the notion that the Matthews family, with its lavish mansion, perfect reunions, and Richard's reputation, was all I had. I tried so hard to belong, to earn my father's recognition, to fit into the picture he had painted. But when the truth about the DNA test exploded, when I learned that Richard wasn't my biological father, and that he chose not to love me because of it, I was forced to rethink what family truly meant. Family, I realized, is the people who choose to stand by you, even when things get tough. It's my mother who overcame her own fears to acknowledge her mistakes and rebuild our relationship. It's Sophia, my sister, who held my hand through emotional storms, reminding me I was her sister no matter what the DNA said. And it's Thomas Keller, a man I only recently met, but who was ready to open his heart to become part of my life without asking me to prove anything. One evening, sitting with Sophia in her Boston apartment, we talked about what had changed since the reunion. She told me about the time she confronted our father, not publicly like I did, but quietly, by refusing to play his power games. I always thought family was something we had to hold on to no matter what, she said, her voice thoughtful. But you showed me that sometimes family is what we choose, the people who make us feel safe and loved. Her words, simple yet profound, illuminated what I had begun to understand. I started reflecting on the people who had become my family beyond blood. Taylor, my best friend, who was always there to listen to, call me out when I blamed myself to remind me I deserved happiness. My colleagues at Goldman Sachs who recognized my talent not because I was a Matthews, but because of the risk assessment models I built. And old college friends I had neglected during my years chasing my father's approval, who now welcomed me back with open arms. They were my family not because of blood, but because of the love and respect we shared. One of the hardest lessons I learned through therapy was that my worth doesn't depend on others' recognition, especially from those who don't deserve it. For my entire life, I had let Richard define me through his criticisms, his cold stares, his comparisons to James. I thought if I was good enough, successful enough, he would look at me with the pride he reserved for my brother. But the truth was, no matter what I did, he would never give me that, not because I was lacking, but because he couldn't. In one therapy session, Hannah asked me to list things I was proud of about myself, unrelated to work or achievements. I sat there pen in hand and realized I didn't know what to write. I had spent my life defining myself through what I accomplished: the Cornell scholarship, the Goldman Sachs job, the Manhattan apartment, but I had never stopped to think about myself as a person. Hannah smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Eliza, you are a strong, resilient, and compassionate woman. You've overcome things many people couldn't. That's your worth, and no one can take that away." From then on, I began focusing on loving myself, not for what I did, but for who I was. I started doing small things to nurture my soul, reading books unrelated to finance, taking long walks in Central Park, joining a yoga class Taylor had been urging me to try for ages. I kept a journal noting moments I felt proud, not for landing a big deal or earning a promotion, but for standing up for myself, like the night I placed the DNA test envelope on the table and walked away from Richard's house. I also learned to forgive myself. I had once blamed myself for spending so many years chasing Richard's approval, for thinking I was the problem. But through therapy, I realized I wasn't at fault. I was a child yearning for her father's love, and that didn't make me weak. It made me human. Forgiving myself was how I reclaimed my strength, not just to confront Richard, but to live a life I could be proud of. Standing up at the family reunion, placing the DNA test envelope on the table, and leaving the Matthews house wasn't just a moment of defiance. It was a declaration that I would no longer let anyone manipulate my worth. Richard had controlled the family through criticism, impossible standards, and making us feel our value depended on his approval. But when I walked away, taking back the Mercedes, I didn't just reclaim a material gift, I reclaimed control of my life. In the months that followed, I received another letter from Richard's lawyer, demanding I retract my slander and issue a public apology. I refused, not because I wanted to prolong the fight, but because I no longer needed his approval. I wrote a short letter in response, sent directly to him, not through a lawyer, "Dad. I once thought I needed you to feel enough, but I was wrong. I don't need you or anyone to define my worth. I wish you well, but I'm not coming back." I received no reply, but that no longer mattered. His silence, for the first time, didn't hurt. My relationship with James remained strained. He called once, his voice full of anger, saying I had destroyed the family's reputation. "Who do you think you are, Eliza? Some kind of hero?" he asked. I responded calmly, "No, James, I'm just someone trying to live true to myself." He hung up and we haven't spoken since. I don't blame James. He's a product of the same system I was once trapped in. But I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship where I was seen as the enemy just for speaking the truth. Letting go of toxic relationships wasn't easy. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I had done the right thing, if I could have handled things differently. But whenever doubt crept in, I remembered the freedom I felt driving the Mercedes away from the Matthews house, standing up to the family, and saying what needed to be said. That was a strength I didn't know I had, and I wouldn't let anyone take it away again. As I grew more confident in myself, I realized my story wasn't just mine. There are millions of people out there struggling with rejection, toxic relationships, and the feeling that they're not enough. I wanted to share my journey not to boast or seek pity, but to remind them they could find strength within themselves. I started a blog, a space where I recounted my story from my childhood in Richard's shadow to the moment I stood up at the reunion. I wrote about therapy, my mother, and Sophia Thomas, and how I learned to love myself. The blog wasn't just a way to organize my thoughts, it was an invitation to others. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, ever craved approval from those who don't deserve it, know that you're not alone. You have the right to walk away to choose your family and to love yourself. My first post received hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories about fathers who were never satisfied families that made them feel invisible and journeys to reclaim themselves. One person wrote, "Your story made me cry, but it also gave me the courage to tell my mom I won't keep enduring her control." Another shared that they had reconnected with their biological father after years inspired by my story with Thomas. These responses not only validated my story, but gave me a new purpose to use my experiences to help others. I also started speaking at small events, from mental health workshops to women's support groups. At a community center in Brooklyn, I stood before a group of about 50 people sharing my story. When I described placing the DNA test envelope on the table, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her eyes red, saying she had cut ties with a toxic family after hearing my story. "I used to think I was a failure because I couldn't make them love me," she said, "but you showed me I can choose my family." That moment, more than any career achievement, made me feel I had done something meaningful. My story also connected me to a broader community, people searching for the meaning of family and self-worth. I joined an online support group where people shared their journeys of overcoming toxic relationships. I volunteered for an organization helping children from struggling families, inspired by Sophia's charity work. And I continued meeting Thomas, building a relationship based not just on DNA, but on mutual respect and sincerity. One evening, sitting with Thomas in a Philadelphia cafe, he asked Eliza if you could go back and change anything. "What would you do differently?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "I wouldn't change anything. Every pain, every failure brought me here to a place where I can love myself and choose my family." He smiled, took my hand, and for the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. That Thanksgiving, I didn't return to the Matthews mansion. Instead, I had dinner at Sophia's Boston apartment with my mother, Thomas, and a few close friends. The table lacked crystal glasses or embroidered linens, but it was filled with laughter and sincerity. My mother raised her glass and said, "I'm proud of you, Eliza, not for what you've done, but for who you are." Those words, which I had once craved from Richard, now came from my mother, carrying a meaning deeper than anything he could have offered. As I write this story, I want to send a message to anyone reading: you don't have to stay in relationships that hurt you. You don't need to prove your worth to those who don't deserve it. True family is the people who love and respect you, and you have the right to choose them. If you've ever felt lost, ever struggled for recognition, remember that your greatest strength lies in living true to yourself. Stand up, walk away if you need to, and find those who will see the light in you. Have you ever found your true family beyond blood? Have you ever had to stand up to defend your worth? Share your story, because it could be a light for someone else. And if this story resonates with you, keep spreading it so we can remind each other that we all deserve to be loved, respected, and true to ourselves.